presenters.
All right. Hey, Carol, thanks so much. Hey, folks, good morning, good afternoon, and or good evening. My name's Lance Spitzner, and I'll be one of your speakers and or presenters for today. Hey, Russell and I are going to keep this fun, short, and informal. We know just how busy you are, but also Russell and I will be staying on afterwards to answer any questions you have. So hopefully you have lots of questions. So as Carol mentioned, you have two of us today. Russell, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so it's been a long time coming, San, to be able to work on this with you, Lance, on this project of taking your class from 2 days to 5 days. It's a lot of work that we did, and throughout the process, it was so interesting to always have the student in mind. Okay, how will they receive this? How can that be valuable? And I'm convinced even with our time together today, there's a lot of value that we can give just talking about the additions, the expansions that we have in our new class. So we're super excited about what we get to talk about today. Been teaching with SANS for over the last 10 years, which seems like a long time, and doing a lot of teaching here from my basement, as I know you've been teaching remotely, and all of us have as well, just, to making the best of it. And it's just been a lot of fun to working with you on this project.
Cool. And Russell, how about a little bit about yourself? What have you done? You've got a very interesting history.
Yeah, so up earlier this year, I left my full-time job. I was formerly the CIO as well as the CISO for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Worked there for over 5 years, and then just before the pandemic started, decided I would go out on my own. So I've run a security consulting company, Security Ever After, teaching some with SANS, writing classes with SANS, doing a lot of consulting with different classes, virtual CISO work. So I get exposed to a whole lot of different companies and really enjoy that type of work right now.
All right, fantastic. So what's really neat is Russell brings a huge amount of very interesting experience from large corporate financial things like that. And as mentioned, my name is Lance Spitzner, and I'm a director at SANS Security Awareness, which means my job and passion is helping organizations around the world help manage their human risk. So I've been at cybersecurity for over 20 years. The first 10 years or so were really technical. So if anybody wants to geek out afterwards, happy to geek out. But really for the past 10 years, I've been focused on the human side. Not only is that where my passion is, but that is honestly where I feel we can make the biggest difference, especially in today's world. And that's why Russell and I are so excited about this class, because we have seen a real need to address the human side. Now, this course was originally a 2-day course, but based on all the tremendous feedback we've gotten from students and our working with other instructors, we saw a need to take this class and blow it out to a 5-day class. So we're not going to be talking about the 2-day class. We're not going to be talking about changes from the 2-day class. We're just going to be talking about this 5-day class, really what it's about and what you can get out of it. So with that said, first of all, remember management is at SANS. We have 50, 60, 70 courses. We're adding so many new cool courses. I can't keep track. Russell, do you know how many classes SANS is up to now?
50, 60, 70 sounds pretty accurate to me.
Yeah. I mean, we've got 10 coming out this month, another 10 coming out in the next month or two, a lot of cloud-based ones. But you may not realize that SANS has different curriculums. Things like offensive security, operations. There we go. Offensive operations, DFIR. Now we have also the management or the leadership track. And what you have here is a variety of both long and short courses. So Management 521 is part of this overall curriculum for the management curriculum. So already a lot of options just on the management, on the leadership side. Now, what's really interesting is we're going to get into more detail, but at a very high level, this new Management 521, the Security Culture course, is what we're calling part of the Management Leadership Triad. And if you think about security leaders today, yes, we need to understand technology and the role it plays in managing risk, but we also need to understand strategy, how to align that security program with the strategic priorities of the organization. But finally, there's a third leg to this, and that's the people side, the culture side. So what's really exciting now is SANS has this triad, this leadership, 3 key courses that focus on technology, strategy, and culture for future security leaders. And that's where 521, this new security culture or course, fits in. It's part of this triad. Russ, now this is really new. What am I forgetting or leaving out?
Yeah, this was really interesting to work with folks at SANS to put this together to give us that visualization. For me, I'm a very visual learner. Look at something, look at a packet, look at a network diagram, it just makes more sense to me. So looking at this, I'm able to see how they fit together, how they interact, and then, if I want to be a security manager or be a CISO or be someone, a change agent that helps uh, adapt the culture to meet the needs of the business for the security team, I can look at this and say, okay, I see how that fits and how that might help relate to being able to achieve that in my respective companies. I really like the visualization. I know a couple of other classes and curriculums are doing that same way to help us better see how it fits together and how we can use that to improve our programs.
So what's really neat at SANS is because we have so many courses, is it can be a little overwhelming. Where do I start? Where do I want to go? Things like that. So many of the different curriculums will have these roadmaps or paths you can take. And the management curriculum is really about management and leadership. And to be an effective leader today, it's not just about technology, but also about strategy and people, culture. So what we're going to do now is for the rest of this short webcast, we're going to be focusing on management 521, the human side, the culture side. This is the one so many organizations are really struggling with today and really don't have the models, the roadmap or framework to handle, what is a strong security culture and how do we build it? So speaking of the problem, so one of the things we like to do is before we jump into the solution, what is the problem we're attempting to solve? Why do we feel we need a security culture course? Well, first and foremost, as so many of us already know, people are one of the biggest risks in organization today. Technology can only go so far. Now, we see it in our own organizations, but one of my favorite resources is the Verizon DBIR. This is a report many of us already know as one of the world's most respected data-driven reports as they collect and analyze data from thousands of incidents from all over the world every year. And for the 2020 report, once again, they found the same thing they've been seeing for the past 3 years. Your top drivers for breaches at a global level are human related. So this is from the report, and all we're identifying here is phishing, passwords, and human error represent 60 to 70% of all breaches at a global level. So from a human risk perspective, this is a huge, huge driver of all of these different breaches. And why is that the case? Well, here's a fantastic little model that shows us we have gotten very good at using using technology to secure technology. 20 years ago, the life expectancy of default Windows computer was 3 hours. In other words, drop it on the internet, somebody finds it and hacks it in 3 hours. And I know that for a fact due to the research I did with the HoneyNet project. But fast forward 20 years later, that default install of a Windows computer would take weeks, months, if not years before a human hacked into it, because Microsoft has implemented a tremendous number of security controls in the default operating system. Now, compare that to how much we've done for the human operating system. Comparatively, very little. Yes, the human OS. Computers store, process, transfer information. People store, process, and transfer information. So I would argue that we've done very little communicating to people in their terms, making security simple for them to follow and exhibit. As a result, I would argue that we have become so good at using technology to secure technology, we are literally driving the bad guy to target the human. This is why we're seeing in all the data, this is why you're seeing in your own incidents that the human is playing such a big role. It's not that people are bad. It's just that we have focused on technology for so long and have comparatively ignored the human side that we're literally driving the bad guys to target people. And this is why Russell and I have decided a big theme of this class and a big theme of culture is not that people are not the weakest link. We're not a fan of that term because when you say people are the weakest link, it implies it's their fault. Instead, people are the primary attack vector. Why are people the primary attack vector? Because we've done a lot to secure technology and little to secure the human. So Russell, anything you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, you know, the reference, Lance, to the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report really aligns well with a life principle I have. It's the best advice I've ever been given a long time ago was this from a non-tech, non-security person. She said to me, get wisdom as cheaply as you can. Get wisdom as cheaply as you can. And for me, this is a fantastic resource that lets us do that. We don't have to suffer the issues or the breaches or the incidents that are highlighted every year in the report, but we can look at that and say, what can I do to avoid that? How can I get that wisdom without having to go through the incident? And it's just a fantastic resource to be able to leverage that as you make your programs, as you want to improve the culture at your organization as well. Really recommend that.
And if you read, the latest Microsoft digital defense report, it's no longer called the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report, or the latest reports from FireEye, CrowdStrike, all the data is pointing to the same thing. So this is one of the key reasons Russell and I are so excited about this culture course, because it's really going to help us more effectively manage our human risk. But there's another component to this also, another problem we're attempting to solve. And that is, it's not just our workforce and behaviors and managing risk there. It's your overall security program. And this is why this is so important from a leadership perspective. One of my favorite examples is the Equifax hack from 2017, probably one of the largest breaches we've experienced in North America, or perhaps even at a global scale. Now, when you look at that event, most people perceive it as a technical event. There was a vulnerability that was not patched in Apache struts. So we had an exposed vulnerability. The bad guys hacked into that vulnerability and then were able to pivot and achieve their goals. And at first you may perceive that as a technical hack, but what's fascinating about the breach, and surprisingly a lot of people don't realize this, in 2018, Congress did a very detailed breach analysis based on technical reports and congressional testimonies, and did a fantastic analysis of what happened and why. And that report is free from the internet. Download it, and if you read the report, if nothing else, just read the first 3 pages, the executive summary. And yes, it was a technical hack, but that was merely a symptom of a very dysfunctional security culture. The security was not talking to the IT team. There was missing gaps. Ultimately, you might think, well, this is a vulnerability management issue. It was, because if you read the congressional report, what you discover is there was actually nobody really in charge of vulnerability management. And really what it comes down to is they had a dysfunctional security culture, and something like this was going to happen sooner or later. So yes, you could say they should have patched the Apache struts vulnerability, but there was a much, much bigger problem, and that was a dysfunctional security culture. So a big part of this class is not only about securing people, but enabling the effective implementation and management of all of your security initiatives, regardless if they're tech-based or not, because it's your security team that's having to help implement and maintain that technology. So this is also going to help address these bigger strategic issues. All right,
And I would say
before
one
we
thing,
go ahead, Russell. So I was about to
just
say,
one
jump
thing
in.
on the, no, no worries. On that previous thing, I would say, so Lance, I'm really into productivity. I've got plans, I got goals, all kinds of things like that. So with that in mind, I would encourage all of you, if you've not already, do as Lance said, read the first 3 pages of that sometime before today's over, or sometime before the week's over. Write it down, hold yourself accountable, and just imagine what would it be like to, again, get that learning. How can we see that while Apache 2 struts was initially the focus, really it could have been anything. It just happened to be that was the catalyst to shine the light on the culture challenges that were being faced at Equifax at the time.
Fantastic, I love it. And the reason we're saying read the first 3 pages is that's the executive summary. I wish we had that type of data or reports after most of the breaches out there. All right, so we've talked about the problem. We have human risk, and the idea, the big driver of the human risk is because traditionally we've been so technology focused, and which is, we're not saying that's a bad thing. It's just we need to now also address the human side. But also a big part is so many security initiatives, even technical ones like DevSecOps, vulnerability management, single sign-on. A lot of the security initiatives ultimately fail not because of technical issues, but because of human issues, cultural issues. That's what we're going to be addressing in this class, and that's why we're so excited. So if you go to the Management 521 website, you'll see these key bullet points of what you're going to learn. And the key elements are, first of all, what is culture? How do I define it? How do I map it? How do I measure it? What is a security culture? Why do I care? What's the benefit? And how do I align my security culture with my existing organization's culture? So one of the key concepts you're going to learn about from this class is quite often people say, well, how do I create a security culture? How do I change my organization's culture? And a key takeaway from this class is you don't want to change your organization's culture as so much as you most likely want to embed security into the existing culture. So a big part is going to be, how do you map what your existing culture is? How do you define what you want your security culture to be? And then how do you align the two? And one of the neat things is we're not going to be reinventing the wheel. Russell and I have been working for years on this class. And one of the neat things we've learned is when it comes to culture, and we'll show you in a moment, there are entire models, case studies, frameworks, and years of research on how to do this, because culture is not a new concept. And the key advantages to all of this is, like we said, not only will you have a more secure workforce, but as a result, your security initiatives, regardless of what they are, will be more effective and more successful. So Russell, anything you'd like to add to this one?
No, I would just summarize what you're saying there, Lance. Just imagine if we were to have a Zoom call or a cup of coffee with folks that we're going to talk about culture, and they came to us and they said, you know what, over our Zoom call for lunch, we have virtual lunches sometimes with friends and colleagues. What do I do? How can I fix this? Tell me about this culture. That's really how we want you to think about this class. A roadmap, a playbook, actionable steps that you can take based on the research, based on the things we're about to cover, so that it can be applied right away. And that's the really exciting part about it, is to not just talk in theory, but to give you practice, give you things that we'll talk about coming soon to actually do this change into your organization.
And so Russell brings up a really key point too. So what ends up happening is we want to ensure we fulfill that SANS promise. And that SANS promise is you can apply what you learn in the next day you go to work after the class. So how did we approach this class? So first of all, is what we did is there, like we said, culture is not a new concept, not a new topic. Far too often in cybersecurity, we're dealing with all this new technology and all these what we feel are unique problems. So we feel like we have to reinvent the solution. But that's not the case with culture. And organizations for years have been building, I want a more innovative culture, a safety culture, wellness culture. So there is a tremendous amount of research out there developed by research scientists and all sorts of fascinating case studies on how you can do something like organizational change. So these are just a highlight of some of the many, many books we have researched. I like to think I've read a lot of books, and Russell blows me away. He's got a huge collection also he's bringing on board. So one of the things we want to emphasize is it's not like Russell and I went out and tried to recreate a whole new solution. Well, where we started is there's a lot of really smart people who have done a tremendous amount of research about culture. Let's start there with the basic fundamentals and see what they can share with us. So a big part of this class is a lot of great research, framework, models, case studies done by people who've spent their entire lives on just these concepts of changing culture, organizational change, and or change management. Russell, once again, what would you like to share?
I think that's such key. It can give legitimacy. It's not just, Russell made something up or Lance made something up, but we're anchoring and aligning to these frameworks where there's research, there's books, there's classes, and we're saying, how can we leverage that? Can we pick the best of or expose the students to that so that they can have that and then possibly align and use those models as well to help their program go further, faster?
Absolutely. And what's exciting is as Russell and I have been researching this for years, and I'm reading all these different case studies, books, and papers, is you start noticing they all share commonalities. They're all saying the same thing, but from a different perspective. Now, the one concern we have is the whole world of organizational change, changing culture, organizational culture, what they call change management, is it can be somewhat academic and somewhat overwhelming. So one of the key things that Russell and I worked very hard on is there's this huge foundation that we want to align with. But also, like we said, this is not an academic class. So we use this as a foundation. And based on this foundation, we then brought in all of this real world stories and lessons learned with all these different organizations we've worked with, and then attempt to simplify all of this research so it is easy as possible for you to implement. And that's where we came up with this 5-day class. We're taking all these lessons learned, all these resources, all this research, and all these foundations, and then we've condensed it, synthesized it, and then translated it to the security world. How do we apply this to the world of cybersecurity? And so what you'll end up getting is this. You end up getting 5 course books because there's 5 days, and that includes both digital and hard copy. You will have a lab workbook with all sorts of references, materials, templates, checklists, but also something we're very excited to announce. This class has a capstone event on the last day. 5 days, you'll have 17 interactive labs. So you're not just listening to Russell and I drone on. Every single day, you will be applying and using what you learn in interactive labs with your fellow students. So you're not only applying what you've learned, but you're also learning from other students, from your peers on how they would apply this. You're also going to get access to a digital download package, which will have a huge number of reports, resources, templates you can modify and reuse, and access to a private community forum dedicated just to managing human risk. Russell, what am I forgetting? Anything else?
The areas that is so valuable, Lance, is when we have students in the class and maybe they're expert or they're certified in some of these models, and they apply that to very large global organizations, and they share things that have worked or tips and tricks with us as well as the students. It's just so valuable to have that interaction with others. It's a big part of the class.
And what's so interesting about culture is there's no right way or wrong way. There's different ways to do it. So you may have some of your fellow students share a story or an approach, and you may go, well, that's not how I would do it, but that's a really interesting perspective. I'll be honest. I've been teaching the human side of cybersecurity for over 10 years now, and every class I teach, I still learn something. So that's one of my favorite things about teaching. All right, so we keep talking about this 5-day class. So what Russell and I are going to do is we'll just give you a quick overview of what this class looks like, what you'll be learning. There's more up on the website, and also, like I mentioned, Russ and I will be happy to answer questions afterwards. So here we have the 5 days. By the way, SANS likes to use the word section instead of day. That way, if you're taking the training online and maybe a section is spread out over a couple of days, but think of a section as 1 day's worth of content. And a very high level, what we do is day 1 is all about the fundamentals. What is culture? What is a security culture? Why do I care? How do I map them? How do I align them? How do I know what I want my security culture to look like? How do I build a strategy to get there? How do I define it? Things like that. Because culture can be a little squishy. And sometimes that can be a little frustrating for us in cyber world because we're used to bits and bytes, yes and no. So what ends up happening is we're going to provide the frameworks for you to kind of put your hands around this and really start being able to better understand it, map it, and define it. To be honest, it's one of my favorite days, but it's also, I found, one of the hardest ones to write because you're taking something squishy and trying to define it. So Russell, as we go through, what would you add to the first day?
I think that foundation, and we'll not only build the 5 days material on, but maybe as the students would go to apply that in their organization, take that, use those data points, not have to do, like you said, years worth of research to say what's out there, how's the industry thinking about organizational health, organizational change and culture. I think it'd be a big benefit.
So, and then on day 2, we're going to get more into the motivation side, the idea of how do we motivate people to do what we want them to do? How do we motivate change? And that could be, how do we get people to exhibit behaviors? How do we get developers excited about DevSecOps? How do we get IT admins excited about patching? It's all about motivating change, not only from a workforce behavior perspective, but in your security initiatives. And this is where we're going to get into communications, marketing, incentivizing, things like that. For day 3, this is where we're going to get more into enabling change. And this is the one I think where you can start having the biggest impact when it comes to culture. And the whole idea is, how can we make security simpler for people? And for that, quite often that is, how do we, the security team, change? So far too often, culture is all about how do we change people so they, like security. But a big part of culture is also, how do we, the security, change? How do we communicate? How do we simplify? How do we enable things along those lines? Because the easier that we make security, the more positive it has to your overall culture. Russell, anything on day 2 or day 3 that you would add?
I think that's a big part of what you said of day 2, day 3 in particular, is looking at all the technical things that we've learned and we've accumulated over our years in cybersecurity, but recognizing the people that we want to influence, they're experts in something else. They could just as easily talk about their craft and make our eyes glaze over, make us fall asleep if they continue to talk that way, but having us adjust our message so that we can give them that. Recognize biases, the acronym speak that we often do, and realize that many times that's a barrier for people even understanding what is it we want them to do, and how do we get very clear steps to motivate and incentivize change. That's going to be a real big part.
So, and what ends up happening here too is a key takeaway from this overall course is to impact your organization's culture, to build a strong security culture. You don't do a security initiative, a security culture initiative. So in other words, a big takeaway from the class is, if you want to do a vulnerability management program, you have a vulnerability management initiative. You want to do single sign-on initiative. You want a security threat intelligence team. You have a CTI initiative. With culture, the idea is not so much you will have a single initiative and then poof, you now have a strong security culture. It's how you build everything you're going to learn into all the different initiatives you do. So if you do a vulnerability management rollout, you include everything you're going to learn from this class, and you'll have a far more successful rollout and a positive impact to your culture. Same thing for if you're going to do encryption rollout, CTI rollout, a SOC rollout, any type of security initiative. So a key takeaway is this is not so much how do I do something like a security awareness program, a poof. It's if you want to go beyond just behavior and impact culture, everything you're going to learn is going to be embedded in just about everything you do from a security initiative perspective. And that's why I'm so excited about day 4, because quite often we focus on, well, how do we communicate, engage our workforce, our teams, and we forget, well, leadership support, because you cannot impact culture without leadership support. And to have effective leadership support, you not only have to speak security, you have to speak business. So I'm really excited about this day, and Russell led this day. So Russell, why don't you talk to us about day 4? Just a quick overview.
Yeah, so yep, happy to do that. And in my last job, CIO at a very important financial organization, one of my colleagues at the time gave me a saying, and I had to think about it and finally adopt it. And now I think I say it every day. This idea that especially as change agents, whether we're leading ourselves or leading a large team, leading a global organization, doesn't really matter. We must be bilingual. We must speak tech and cyber and all the things that we need, but it's how we make our living, how we make an impact. But we also have to be able to speak business. It's a vulnerability project program, great, but most companies don't exist for cybersecurity purposes. Cybersecurity can help them and protect them and keep them safe and make that all work out. But we have to understand our role and how we can support the business. How can we help the business go faster? Well, if we look for patches and we apply them in the right way, we understand the impact of how that aligns with our overall organization. Now, all of a sudden, we can start to speak business. The reason that I'm doing this vulnerability management program is maybe one of our mission or our values has certain terms like integrity or profitability or innovation, whatever that might be. And to be able to align the cyber things to the business things, all of a sudden they say, oh, it's a good thing the team is there. It's enabling the business to go further and to go faster. What we see is that if we want to take those technical things and bring it to and use it as have a vehicle to communicate that, oftentimes we use the tool of a business case. So a large part of day 4 is what is a business case? How do you make a business case? How do you put together the executive summary of a business case as you want to translate all those technical things, whatever it is, so that chief executive officers or chief marketing officers or chief financial officers can make an ultimate business decision to invest or not invest in that particular capability.
So security culture is not only about engaging your workforce and your peers, but your leadership and talking to them in their terms. And that's what day 4 is all about. And then day 5 is a capstone. Think of almost like a capture the flag event where you put together everything you've learned in a simulated environment, and you're going to be working as teams to make a variety of key decisions to build a strong security culture. And not only are you working as teams, but you're also competing as teams. All right, that was a quick overview of those 5 days. If you want, you can learn a little bit more on the website, but just once again, this is what we have in day 1. We've already covered quite a bit of this. One of the key things on day 1 is you will have 3 interactive labs, and we're going to be talking about and comparing other cultures. So for example, we'll use examples like Netflix cultures or Zappos culture or Nordstrom's culture. How do they define their culture? What does a Zappos culture have to do with security culture? You're going to be introduced to different frameworks. So for example, there's the culture factor framework. There's this Satir framework. We're going to be defining culture as, interestingly enough, as an iceberg, learn how all that works. So this just gives you an idea of what we'll be covering on that first day. And then like we said, for this second day, it's all about how do we connect with people, engage, motivate, market, and not only to specific groups, but how do we incentivize and motivate change at a global level? So for day 2, you're going to be learning things about the golden circle, marketing models, marketing personas, what is an incentive program, why recognition is so much more powerful than reward. What is the difference? How do we apply it? And you're going to be learning about all sorts of different things. For example, what does Isaac Newton have to do with behavior change? What does Isaac Newton have to do with cultural change? Then the things along, the elephant in the rider, based on a fantastic book by Switch. We're going to be adopting some of the best marketing campaigns out there. And then you can learn what the movie Matrix and Revenge of the Nerds has to do with cybersecurity culture. By the way, like I said, if you knew what that picture was, what Revenge of the Nerds, and you said that's Revenge of the Nerds, not only does that mean you're a geek, but you're an old geek.
Yep.
Day 3, and Russell, as I'm going through here, just trying to do one last review. If there's something you want to jump in with, just jump in.
Yep.
Day 3 is all about enabling that change, things about ADDIE model, curse of knowledge, really trying to, how can we make security simpler? So security culture is not about just how do we change other people, but really how do we change security and ourselves? But a big part of this also on day 3 is not only just enabling that change, but also measuring change. How do you even measure a security culture, let alone quantify that culture and communicate that culture to leadership? So we'll be getting into also the measurement and the visualization of culture also. And like I said, at first it sounds hard, but don't forget a lot of organizations have already done this. So you're going to be learning things like, yep, we are going to Marie Kondo your security program. You're going to be learning things like the Kirkpatrick learning model, things about what does Homer Simpson and Spock have to do with your culture? May sound odd, but it makes for a fantastic analogy about how people think and how people operate. On day 4, Russell, this is all you.
Yeah, and so it would take that information and say, okay, well, how do we communicate that in a way where our leadership team can understand and ultimately make a decision? What we assert in day 4 is really what we want is a decision. Do they support and approve different projects that we have or not? And make it easy for them to understand that. Very famous leadership guru, John Maxwell, said, leadership is influence. This is our chance to leverage the business case as an opportunity to influence our leaders, not make them go get a cyber degree or take a SANS class to understand what we're talking about, but in clear English business supporting language, invite them to consider the possibilities by looking at the business case. And so just to highlight that we have with the formula there of what one looks like, how to make one. We've got a lab of how to make one and a fully developed business case for security initiatives that are in place. And if you'll click to the next slide, we also say not just how to do it, but what are some of the mistakes to avoid. Common mistakes that we see in business cases, poor communication, not aligning to the business. Maybe you go to the board and you say, hey, board of directors, will you give me money? Well, they don't do that. So we want you to avoid types of mistakes that can hinder you or stand in the way. But again, what we want from that is a tool that you can use over and over and over again with a repeatable process to invite your senior leadership team to make a decision, up or down. Either way, we win as cybersecurity leaders in that.
And once again, just to emphasize, when it comes to building a strong security culture, it's not about one single initiative and poof, you have the culture you want. To impact culture is you're going to embed all the lessons from this class into almost any security initiative, any outreach program. And think about it, a key part of any successful security initiative is getting that leadership support and building a successful business case. Yep. All right, like we said, a key part of that promise from SANS is you will be able to apply everything you learn the day you get back to work. And we want to be sure you can successfully do that by the day 5 is a capstone project where you're going to be basically think of a simulated environment, a simulated game where throughout the day you're going to do a series of labs. You and your team have to make key decisions on how to build a strong security culture. And then the very last lab of the day is literally building a business case for those initiatives that you want to implement. And you're going to be working as a team. So once again, our goal is to help ensure you can take all these elements together and apply them when you get back to your organization. So to summarize, the whole goal of this class is to provide you everything you need to map, measure, and embed a strong security culture. Like I said, our goal is not so much to change your culture, but to embed security into the existing culture. And a key thing here is, yes, there's a foundation of academic theory and case studies, but we're also going to be leveraging a huge number of lessons learned, resources, and materials that others have already successfully used. And these are materials that you can leverage so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're going to provide the framework and resources for you to hit the ground running. And the end result here is not only do you have a more secure workforce, addressing those risks that we brought up in the beginning, remember the Verizon DBIR, but by building a stronger culture, your security initiatives will be far more successful. Like I said, vulnerability management, single sign-on, DevSecOps, building blowing out a SOC, a CTI team, all of these will be more successful because think about it. All those different technical security initiatives that have failed quite often didn't fail because of the technology, but poor partnership, communication, toxic culture. That is what this class is going to help you address. So ultimately, you are a more successful and effective security leader. Russell, what else am I forgetting?
Yeah, I know we said it before, just having this playbook in the course materials, the digital downloads, the lab exercises that you'll do, and we'll have answers for possible solutions to each of those as well. So you can go back and remind yourself and apply this information. Think of it as a playbook. If you want to embed security into the culture of your organization, this is your playbook. We've done years of research. We've found it on a lot of popular models where you can say, here's why I'm doing this. Here's why it makes sense. Here's how I can go and communicate this technical thing that I want to do in a way that the business can understand and they can make a decision on and start to make that change of not naming and shaming and, oh, you stupid user, you made a mistake. That's just horrible. We don't want that at all. We want to enable you to see the light, to follow the playbook and make an enormous change on the culture at your organization. And we're convinced this class will help you do just that.
And one other thing too, Russell brought up those frameworks and roadmaps. And like we said, the frameworks and roadmaps we're using are the exact same frameworks and roadmaps your leadership learned when they went to get their master's at Harvard or something like that. I mean, one of the top resources we kept finding ourselves going to was the Harvard Business Review. So what's great is the models we're teaching, the frameworks, the resources, the theory we're aligning with is the same frameworks, roadmaps, and theories and research your senior leadership is already familiar with. So when you start talking to them about what you're going to do and how, you're already using their language. All right, finally, one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite security visionaries, Bruce Schneier, just emphasizing, folks, no longer is cybersecurity purely a technical problem with a technical solution. We also have to start addressing the human side, and for security leaders, that is precisely what this class was designed to do. All right, if you want to learn more, there's the URL, but Russell, anything else?
Lance, I'll never forget where I was when you called me and said, hey, I'm working on this class about culture. Do you know anything about culture? And I'm thinking, oh, do I know anything about culture? And ever since that moment, every email we've had, every phone call we've had, everything we've done up until this moment has just been a great delight to be able to share that and contribute to this. And I know that we will make a great impact as a result of the product that we have, our new 5-day class.
And one of the reasons we're both so excited is both Russell and I help teach the other two courses you see on this Triad, 512, the technology perspective, and 514, the strategic perspective. And by teaching those other two courses, both Russell and I are like, these are fantastic courses, but we're really missing that human perspective. So that's why we're so excited to have that third leg of the Triad. The three pieces have come together. Carol, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have a few, thanks. And if anyone has any questions for Lance or Russell, please enter them into the questions window now. One person asked a while back for the link to the class, and you had it on the screen a moment ago, but you could just pull that up again.
Sure.
And then we'll go on to the next question. Someone says, how do you measure the culture? And if we need more clarification, we can.
Sure. So first of all, remember what culture is, and that's part of the iceberg, is culture is not only what people say and do, but also what they think, their perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs, and their values, things like that. And so one of the things is, if you're going to measure culture, one of the ways you have to do that is get into their minds. So a big part of the metric section will be surveys. How do you design a survey? How do you analyze a survey? Focus groups, things along those lines. So that's where you can be very quantitative, but you also end up being a little qualitative. So one of the things that both Russell and I did is that's where we went to the academic world and say, how do you measure culture? And one of the things we kept finding ourselves is we kept ending up in the world of human resources, because the world of human resources is very much focused on the culture of the organization. How do you measure that culture? So they have things called engagement surveys. So we went to the human resources world and said, how do you measure an organization's culture? And then we've applied that and converted it into the human security side. So what ends up happening is we're going to cover a lot of things, but really with the emphasis on survey design, survey analysis, focus groups, a little bit more on the qualitative side. Russell, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, on that one, it reminds me, a couple of years ago, I did a practice, and I made, required, requested, whatever the verb is, those I was privileged to lead to do the same thing, and I called it the cafeteria test. The idea, and maybe it's the Zoom test now because we're not gathering like we used to gather a couple of years ago, but this idea of when you get your tray, you go to the cafeteria and you start to look around, and when someone makes eye contact and they see you, do they scurry away? Or do they say, wait, there's Russell, there's Lance, they fixed my problems, there they are, I want to spend time with them. So getting that nonverbal cue can be something you can practice on a regular basis, just to see when you show up or your team shows up, how do they perceive that? What's their beliefs and values for the interactions you've had to date? And you can use that for a great litmus test. Again, for now, we'll have to use Zoom or GoToMeeting or other technologies to say, does someone groan, or do they engage when they see you there? You can use that to say, what would it look like to take that and make it better? How could I make that better? How could I make it so I could delight them better?
Oh, and another follow on what Russell is saying too, and we talk about this in the classes, monitor the Slack channels, the Yammer channels, the forums that you have, and see, what are people saying about cybersecurity? Are they complaining? Are they loving it? Are they not saying anything? So sometimes the metrics you're gathering are very passive, and just seeing what are people's attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs, and quite often that's just in the communication with each other. And like I said, what I found surprising is every time I went to the metric side, quite often I would lean heavily on the world of human resources. And in fact, a big part of the metric section is built on the expertise and conversations I had with two people who consult in that world on measuring the human resources side of culture. Carol, any other questions? That's why I get so excited, because developing this course really forced me and Russell to, push our comfort zone, talk to people we normally wouldn't be talking to, and just learn.
Yes, Lance, we do have quite a few questions here. So if we are already registered for the 2-day course, how can we sign up and upgrade to the 5-day course?
Fantastic question. I don't know the answer, but I do know who does. If you've signed up for the 2-day, and want to take the 5-day, then email info@sans.org and they will help you out. And in fact, that brings up a great point. We are going to be ending the 2-day course. The last 2-day course will be taught in December by Russell. So starting in January, only the 5-day course will be offered. But yet, for those of you that are signed up for the 2-day, if you want to take the 5-day, that will be Russell. And in fact, that brings up a great point. The very first time we're going to teach the 5-day is 14 December, and that is a beta, which means it has a 25% discount, and that's the only time it'll be a discount. But also, it's going to be taught by both Russell and I, so you get twice the expertise for a for 25 with a 25% discount.
It's kind of like taking this webcast and spanning it over 5 days. Is that pretty accurate? The fun, the engagement that we have.
Absolutely. All right, and they would like to know, how long will we have access to the content? I've only taken SANS in person, and we are able to keep the books, which is great.
Yep. So what ends up happening is this. For this class, you'll get both digital and hard copies of the course material. And this is, that's new now. That's for all SANS courses, not just this one. So if you've been taking a SANS class before and you're like, I'd like a digital copy of the books, you now get that. And that's permanent. But the other real permanent things you're going to get is access to the community forum if you want it. And the other one is the digital download package. And that is all of these additional materials that we've developed to help you be successful. And that's templates, checklists, matrices, past reports. So we'll be referencing reports like the Verizon DBIR, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, because we want to provide as much data as we can. And we'll provide all of those in the digital download package also. So what you end up getting are the course materials, the labs, all of them permanent, the community forum, the digital download package. And Russell, anything else?
And one thing with the digital download package, it's something that we update almost every day, almost every week. When a new item, something that sparks our interest that maybe we don't have it in the class, but for further research or for future use, know that that's not a static thing, but very dynamic. And we continue to add a lot of value to the students by having that available. And you have that access forever.
You know, Russell, one of the things we didn't mention is, really who's this class is designed for. And as we kind of covered in the beginning, it's really designed more for the senior, more experienced security professional. So if you are brand new to cybersecurity, we would not recommend this the place to start. There are probably some other courses that are much, much better off, like maybe a Management 433. But if you've been in this for a while and want to really mature your skill set, then definitely this class is for you.
All right, thanks. What would you recommend is the suggested order of the 3 courses?
Ooh, oh my goodness, the suggested order of the Triad. Oh boy, help me, Russell. That's a really good question.
So I think it depends on where you're at and where you want to go. So with Management 514, strategic planning, I think the closest thing we have to how to be a CISO class, part of that is where are you, your current state, and where do you want to be, your future state? And then the gap is what are the initiatives to help get you to whatever that security capability is. I think of that here. If you're in supervisor, manager, leader, director of cybersecurity and new, or maybe you've grown up in cyber, I think that class Management 512 on security leadership essentials for managers might be very helpful. If you're a CISO, or maybe you wake up one day and your boss says, hey, congratulations, you're now the cybersecurity executive. Management 514, I know, Lance, you and I have taught that many times. It's the class that me as a senior security leader for many years wishes that I'd have had 20 years ago. So many mistakes I would have avoided as a cyber security leader is how I look at that one. So the manager level, the executive level is how I differentiate the 512 to the 514. And again, 521, I think you did an excellent job of framing who's it for and who's it not for. So I would say, depending on where you are, what are your goals? Where do you want to be? If you were to do an assessment that says, in 3 years for my cybersecurity, I want to be, and you fill that in, it's likely that looking at this triad can help you look at what's your next class or your next opportunity to learn to equip you for your future state goal.
Real quick, I would say if you want to take all three, though, I think my recommended order would be definitely start with 512. That does the technology overview of all the different fields in cybersecurity, kind of gives you that baseline. Then I would probably go into the culture side. So we've got the technology side, we've got the people side. So I'd recommend first 512, then 521, and then I would recommend probably management 514, the strategy one, because then it brings all of those elements together. It kind of, how do you take the technology and people side, and how do you build a strategy that brings that together and aligns it with your organization's overall strategy?
And someone, if you follow that 1, 2, 3 step that Lance outlined, you absolutely will be that transformational cybersecurity leader.
But no, that's a really good point. We should probably create a blog on explaining, what each class is, the advantages, and but the advantages and the areas they fill, but also the order. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. We have quite a few questions left, and someone specifically wondering if there's a way they can reach out to you directly.
Yeah. So Carol, could you be so kind as to post to everyone our email addresses? So folks, my email address is lspitzner@sans.org. So Carol, I'll just post that to you. Could you copy and post that to everyone?
Sure, yeah, I'll get that out. While I work on that, I'll ask you the next question. How much of the course content is applicable for use in the UK?
Oh, so this is absolutely 100%. So there is nothing specific to the US. We do examples from a global perspective, and that's exactly it. The whole idea is we show you how to map culture, deconstruct culture, define culture, frameworks for culture, but all of those tools are culture agnostic. In other words, how do you map a culture? Well, it doesn't matter if it's a UK culture and Middle East culture, Asian culture, South American culture. All of this will work. In fact, that's how the whole class is designed, with the understanding that every region, generations, nationalities, all have different cultures. So no, yeah, absolutely. It should map 100% to the UK, to Singapore, to Colombia, to Nigeria.
All the places.
Yep.
All right, thanks. For those who complete all 3 MGT courses, is there an overarching certification like C-CISO or CISM or GSE?
We are working on that. We want to blow this out. We want to do a cool coin, maybe a cool capstone where once you take all 3 courses, a certification. So the answer to that is yes, yes, and yes, just not yet.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
We're smiling so big because we've been working on that and been talking about that for quite a while, and happy to have the support to be able to do that.
All right, great. I understand that in this course, we will understand how apply nudge in cybersecurity to improve the behavior? Question mark.
So absolutely. So keep in mind, culture is all about both behavior and attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs, what people do and what people think. So Nudge, a book by Thaler and Sunstein, 2 fantastic authors, is a very influential book about how do we get people to do what we want them to do without them even realizing it. So the Nudge foundation and the science behind that book will go a lot in day 3. How do we get people to do without them realizing what we want to do? And it's not just about changing them, but how do we architect our policies so they're easier to follow? How do we Marie Kondo our policies so we're not overwhelming people? And once again, like I said, the class is never built on one specific theory. We're always bringing these different elements together. They all influence each other. So Nudge, Thaler and Sunstein's book and theory, it's one of the elements that really helps contribute to day 3. How do we make security simpler, enabling, ability, stuff like that?
All right, thanks. Is there a SANS educational path to build the skills and credentials to be qualified to run or start an awareness program?
Absolutely. Now for the awareness side, awareness is a subset of culture. So culture is very broad. Like I said, what people do and what people think. Awareness is more specific just on the behavior. We want to get people to do certain behaviors. So awareness is kind of a subset below this. That would be the Management 433 course. And that's where I'd recommend people start. In fact, that is sometimes a precursor or a builder or a foundation to some of what I would consider these more advanced classes. I would consider a Management 521 a culture course, an advanced or follow-on to the Management 433 course. And in fact, the URL for that class is, I'm going to tap it. Carol, if you could be so kind as to copy and paste that URL to the community.
Yes, I will. And we have, I know we're just about out of time, but I've got 3, I think, kind of brief questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'll jump in. Will the course also be available online in European time zone?
Absolutely, but a European time zone, and the class will be developed and packaged for SANS on demand. So you can take it on your own time and own pace if you like.
Thank you. Is there a GX certification for Management 521?
Not yet. So what ends up happening is there's usually a delay that takes about 6 months to a year. So definitely in the plans, but not there yet.
All right, thanks. And the last one that we have time for, do you have a link to the 5-day beta?
Oh, to the actual, you think after promoting it, I would have it? No, I don't, but if you go to,
I'll see if I can get it real quick.
oh, you're good. All right. So what I've done, Carol, is I posted you a link. If you go to the link to the SANS, this is silly. I forgot. Duh, I've got a slide with this right here. If you go there, just the beta, it's linked from here.
Yep. And Carol, I sent you the link to the first run in December. Yep.
To the one you sent over. So, all right. So yes. Anyone else who has additional questions, you can reach out to Lance or Russell directly or submit it to q@sans.org. So with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Lance and Russell, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
See y'all.
Thanks, folks.